of tapping in to the experience of God. So there was a great deal of reverence toward these vessels. About the year 400 to 470, the Roman Empire is collapsing and there's all kinds of chaos. It's not a good time to be anywhere, basically. And politically and in society at large, there's a lot of anarchy and people do not feel safe. And this is when there's a tremendous amount of growth in monasteries of the Catholic Church. A monastery, correct me if I'm wrong, but a monastery is a building but again, it's the people in the building more than it is the building, but a group of men who are monks or priests who live together with the sole purpose of praising God in their work and in their prayer. And all monasteries had a church. And so monasteries often became places where people felt safe. So when a lot of bad things were happening, people would go to the monastery and they would seek refuge. Churches were considered a place of refuge at that time. The monasteries seemed to enjoy opening their doors to visitors. So that, the church there was a different way of meeting the needs. The people felt a need to come, and the monasteries opened their doors at that time. The music became very much a part of the monastery life. And music in worship was usually chanted by the priests and the monks, rather than the people who came to Mass. And they were definitely, the hymns now are definitely Christian. They're not singing the old anything related to their Jewish tradition. And there are still people today who love to go to Conception Abbey and listen to the monks chant at different times of the day, of the year. And you can, that's again, a very, very Catholic experience that some of you might enjoy doing sometime. And you'll find that the Abbey is very hospitable and very welcoming of visitors. The earliest Christian Bibles are available now. The New Testament has been compiled more or less somewhere in the 700s. But again, people can't read. So a lot of these Bibles they're rare, and very, very few of them, they are elaborately done. And mostly by the monks. That's part of their ministry, is to literally write the Bibles, to copy the manuscripts and write the Bibles. They're very ornate. And oral tradition is still very, very important. There's a need at this point, too, to really begin, because of the spreading of the church, the idea of kind of monitoring things, the idea of somebody following in Peter's footsteps to make sure that things are done properly and oversee things so that the message of Jesus was preached as the apostles who knew Jesus wanted it to be taught. So the clergy becomes extremely important during this period of time. Some people would say the church became very, very clerical. The people who were the respected ones in the church, and erroneously, and even into my own childhood, a lot of us thought of church people as the priests and the bishops and the pope. But it's during this time that they become so terribly important, because the church has grown, and there has to be some quality control, for lack of a better term, to what's going on. You can't just have somebody doing his thing here and his thing there and proclaiming himself here and there. So again, the idea of apostolic tradition, we're still, Pope Benedict or Pope Francis today, we can trace him clear back to the apostles, for better or for worse, Some of those popes were ornery little stinkers, but we can trace the way back, all the way to the apostles. And so these people that the apostles have ordained or have commissioned are extremely important now. Then about, and also the other thing that happens is that the vessels, things like the chalice, the monstrous, the ciborium, nobody touches those but the priest. Okay, nobody touches those but the priest, or the bishop, or the pope. Again, a real shift in who's important in the church. And not necessarily was it a good thing, but it's pretty much the way things happen. Now, as the church becomes more and more clerical, we're talking here now, somewhere between 750 and the year 1000, not only is the priest more important than the people, he's separated from the people. Now, we've gone completely from sitting around the table with our priest having Eucharist to, oh, no, the church is now divided. And in many churches, there's actually a wall with something of a thing to peek through. And the priest is up here offering Mass, and the people are in the nave. And the separation is emphasized. Again, a very, very clerical in the sense of the priest is holier than you are, and you stay there, and he'll do the Eucharist over here. You just let him do that. And the priest is no longer singing. He's saying Mass. The congregation is not singing. The vessels are getting smaller, and again, only the priest can touch them. And because the church is growing, there's a growth in the actual number of church buildings. So you're having, the problem was, this is when the law became, in order to be Catholic, you should go to, one of the requirements is that you attend Mass once a week. And this is when this actually became important, because sometimes, until those little churches were built, people had to travel huge distances to get to Mass. And so it was said, if you're going to be Christian, again, probably the term Catholic wasn't used, you must come to Eucharist once a week, even if you have to travel a long way. So, in the meantime, more and more churches are being built. And this is also the time when a lot of devotions develop apart from the Eucharist. Because keep in mind, the Eucharist is there, the people are here, there's such a separation. And so other devotions that develop outside the Eucharist. And the church walls begin to tell stories. This is when you start seeing mosaics and stained glass windows. And you start having a lot of artistic expression that is helpful to illiterate people. So they can have a religious experience sitting in the church while the real action is going on in front of them. But they struggle a bit to relate, because they are very much separated from the actions of the consecration itself and a real experience of being a part of the Eucharistic celebration. So then, in about the year between 1,000 and 15,000, you start getting these gorgeous cathedrals. If you've ever been to Europe, you see these cathedrals that reach sky high with windows that have stained glass in them with colors that we can no longer replicate, because the recipes have died with those craftsmen, and they took them to their graves with them. But churches now made of stone, and they were outrageously gorgeous, and people were living in huts. So it became, again, there was a real separation between your life here and your church life. And, you know, in defense of what was going on, people saw that they felt that their way to glorify God was to build the church higher, taller, more ornate. The more beautiful it was, the more it showed their love for God. But they were quite extravagant, and they were really supposed to be almost a heavenly experience in and of themselves. And in some ways, maybe became almost more important, the building almost more important than what was supposed to go on in the building. But nonetheless, beautiful. Again, people are silent. No congregational singing. You hear Mass on Sunday. You don't attend or pray the Mass. You're obligated to hear it because the priest is doing all the talking. And at this point in time, you've got at least, in most churches, 2 side altars. And many churches start to have extra little chapels where a certain saint or a certain important person might have his tomb. And so you get a church with clusters of little chapels going all around it. And they're enormous. They're beautiful, they're enormous. They are definitely extravagant in many ways. So then, between the 1500s and the 1900s, we get to, in the latter part of that time frame, churches a lot like St. Francis. And as a child, now I'm not coming from the 1500s here, but as a child who grew up in the 50s, I can probably assure you that the Mass I went to as a child was very much like that Mass that I just described to you. As a child, when I went to Mass, the priest, we didn't have the big wall, but the priest faced the big altar. His back was to us almost constantly. And we did sing some, but not a lot. Basically, we watched what the priest did, and it was all in Latin. We followed along in our little missal, so we know what was going on. But it was difficult to always really find that for me at least. Now, you'll find people who still, to this day, gripe and complain that they did away with the Latin Mass. I'm not going to be one of those that gripes and complains because they did away with the Latin Mass. But and the Latin Mass was very beautiful. There were to listen to a Latin Mass, it's beautiful. And no one Mass is worth more than another. A Spanish Mass, a Latin Mass, an English Mass is a Mass. But it was very difficult to participate actively in Mass for me as a child. The choir did all the singing. We didn't sing. And the priest sang, if anybody other than the choir sang. And again, private devotion, you'd see people praying their rosaries during Mass a lot. No one should be praying their rosary during Mass. Rosary is a wonderful devotion, but you shouldn't pray it during Mass. You'd see people reading from their prayer books during Mass. Prayer books are wonderful, but there was a detachment. There was a real detachment. But then the 1960s came, and there were changes, and there were adjustments, and there were reactions, and there were overreactions, and Pope John XXIII called Vatican II. And Vatican II was the biggest church event, certainly in my lifetime, because Vatican II, as Pope John XXIII said, was meant to open the windows, get some fresh air back in, and bring the laity into involvement in this church so that it wasn't just the priest doing his thing at the altar and us doing our thing out there. So the side altars became less important. And the statues. You know, a lot of Catholic churches had altars that were simply filled with statues.